At 3 in the morning, a historian breaks the rules. Deep inside a sealed library vault, she opens a book bound in human skin. Inside is a Templar diary that was never meant to survive. The knight does not write about faith. He writes about greed. About allies who sold them out before the first sword was raised. La Forbie, 1244. He claims the ground screamed that night. That some Templars did not fall, they vanished. And that what followed them out of the darkness was not human. Every page ends with the same warning. We were sacrificed. If this diary is real, then the Templars were erased because they knew too much. And La Forbie was not a defeat. It was an execution. The book was not listed in any catalogue. It lay in the lowest vault of the library, wrapped in cracked leather, sealed behind a rusted iron grate marked restricted since 1702. The historian had seen enough medieval bindings to know this one was wrong. Too thick. Too heavy. As if it carried more than paper. Inside, the writing was hurried. Violent in its strokes. Latin, mixed with Old French. Not the language of a monk, but of a soldier. The first page named him a knight of the poor fellow soldiers of Christ. A Templar. He did not write of glory. He did not write of Jerusalem. He wrote of fear. La Forbie, the entry began. We were told victory was certain. That much history confirms. In 1244, the Crusader states believed they had regained control. Jerusalem had been retaken without battle. An alliance with Damascus promised stability. For the first time in decades, the Crusaders felt chosen again. But the diary describes something else. Warnings ignored. Scouts silenced. Commanders arguing while gold changed hands. He writes that the Templars urged caution and were overruled. That allies promised support, then began to withdraw before the enemy ever struck. Then comes the line scratched so deeply it tore the page. They decided who would die before the sun rose. Modern historians agree on the outcome. At La Forbie, the Crusader army was annihilated. Thousands killed. The Templars nearly erased. Their Grand Master vanished. The order never recovered. But the diary claims this was no military mistake. It was deliberate. As the historian turns the page, she notices something no chronicler ever recorded, a symbol drawn again and again in the margins. Not Christian. Not Islamic. And beneath it, a final sentence. We were not defeated. We were offered. The diary does not describe a battlefield. It describes a trap. La Forbie lay on a flat coastal plain near Gaza, open ground, no natural defense, nowhere to retreat. The Templars knew it was wrong. The knight writes that they argued through the night, pointing to the horizon, to the dust clouds that never stopped moving. Khwarezmian riders. Thousands of them. At dawn, the Allied banners were still standing. Frankish lords. Muslim forces from Damascus. An army large enough to inspire confidence or complacency. Then the signal horns sounded. The Khwarezmians struck first, their cavalry crashing into the Crusader left flank with terrifying speed. The diary says the ground shook, not from fear, but from numbers. The Templars held the centre, shields locked, doing what they had done for 2 centuries, absorbing the impact. They waited for the counterattack. It never came. From the corner of his eye, the knight saw banners turning away. Allied units pulling back. At first slowly, then all at once. The line dissolved, he writes. Not broken. Abandoned. Modern accounts confirm this moment. The Damascene forces withdrew early. The Frankish infantry collapsed soon after. What remains disputed, and what the diary insists on, is why. The Templars were left alone in the center of the field, surrounded on all sides. The knight describes fighting until his arms went numb, until the air grew thick with dust and smoke. He describes men dropping, not screaming, but praying. Then something changes in the writing. The sentences shorten. The ink darkens. He writes of a sound beneath the battle, a low vibration, like breath coming from the earth itself. He claims wounded men stopped crying out, as if listening to something only they could hear. We were no longer fighting for victory, he writes. We were being measured. By nightfall, the field belonged to the enemy. The Templars who still stood were taken alive, an unusual mercy. The knight does not call it mercy. He calls it selection. The page ends with a single sentence, written sideways, as if in haste. Those who fled were spared. Those who remained were claimed. They were not killed. That was the first thing that troubled him. The surviving Templars were bound and marched east, away from the coast, away from anything familiar. The diary notes this with confusion. Knights of the Order were valuable prisoners, but rarely spared in such numbers. The Grand Master was among them. Amand de Perigord, leader of the Templars, captured alive. History confirms this. What history does not agree on is what happened next. The diary fills that silence. They were separated immediately. Not by rank. Not by injury. But by something the knight could not understand. Guards whispered to one another as they passed, marking some prisoners with charcoal symbols on their armor, the same symbol he had drawn in the margins. Those marked were taken at night. No screams followed. He writes of camps where torches burned until dawn, yet shadows moved where no fire stood. Of interrogations that did not ask for secrets or gold, only names, places, and what had been found beneath the battlefield. This aligns with a known fact. After La Forbie, the Templars never recovered their lost relics or records from the region. Entire inventories vanished. No ransoms were negotiated. No bodies returned. The knight claims the captors were not interested in the order. They were interested in knowledge. One entry breaks from the narrative entirely. The handwriting changes. Shakier. As if written by a different man. Some were released, he writes. Not because they were forgiven, but because they were empty. Those who returned spoke little. Those who did not were never listed among the dead. As for the Grand Master, the diary offers only one line. He was not executed. He was kept. The historian pauses here. Official records say Armand de Perigord died in captivity. The diary says something else. It ends the segment with a warning written in red ink. They learned what we were guarding. And they decided who would carry it forward. The diary becomes dangerous after this point. The historian notices it immediately. The deeper she reads, the less linear the entries become. Dates overlap. Locations contradict known routes. As if the knight were no longer writing from one place, or one moment. In captivity, the Templars were questioned separately. Not about Jerusalem. Not about fortresses or gold. The diary repeats the same demand again and again. What did you see beneath the field? The knight claims that before the battle, Templar scouts uncovered something buried near La Forbie, older than the Crusades, older than Islam. Stone markings that did not match any known script. A chamber sealed long before any kingdom claimed the land. He writes that the Grand Master ordered silence. That decision, he believes, sealed their fate. At night, prisoners marked with the symbol were taken to a second camp. Those who returned were altered. Calm. Detached. As if emptied of urgency or memory. Others never returned at all. The diary describes one night when Armand de Perigord was removed from his tent under heavy guard. No chains. No violence. Respectful. Deliberate. He went willingly, the knight writes. As if he already knew. History records the Grand Master's death in captivity. No date. No witness. Just absence. The diary rejects this. He was not killed, it insists. He was bound to keep the balance. The historian feels it then, a pressure behind the eyes, a faint ringing in the ears. She closes the book, only to notice the symbol faintly impressed onto the desk beneath it, as if burned by weight alone. Greed explains why the diary was hidden. Fear explains why it stayed unread. Because if the knight's account is true, La Forbie was not a military disaster. It was a negotiation. The Templars were offered, not for defeat, but for containment. Some were released to carry nothing. Others were kept to guard what should never surface again. And the final line, written on a page deliberately torn and reinserted, reads, "If this record is found, it means the Watchers are weakening. Or hungry." The diary never names them. It only describes the effect they have. The knight writes that the Templars did not discover something beneath La Forbie, they disturbed it. A chamber of worked stone buried far deeper than any battlefield grave, its walls carved with symbols worn smooth by time, not war. No bones. No idols. No treasure. Only marks meant to be seen and remembered. The Watchers, as the knight calls them, were not beings of flesh. They were a presence. An awareness that responded when the ground above was broken. He compares it to standing before a sealed confessional, knowing something is listening on the other side. Some knights felt nothing. Others collapsed without injury, struck by panic so sudden it emptied their lungs. The diary claims the Grand Master alone understood the danger. He ordered the site sealed and the record erased. Too late. The knight believes word spread beyond the camp. Through merchants. Through gold. Through those who knew how to sell silence. That is when the questions began in captivity. Not what the Templars knew, but who among them had been touched. The Watchers did not pursue. They waited. The historian's hands tremble as she reads this section. The symbol appears more frequently now, drawn with precision instead of fear. She notices the margins around it are unnaturally clean, as if the parchment itself resisted ink. One passage feels less written and more dictated. They do not cross thresholds. They do not act without invitation. They are bound to place and to promise. The promise, the knight implies, was made at La Forbie. Containment in exchange for survival. This explains the unthinkable, why prisoners were spared, why the Grand Master was kept, and why those released returned hollowed but alive. As the historian reaches the final line of the segment, the lights in the reading hall flicker, once. The knight's closing warning is calm. No fear. No drama. If the Watchers are named, they will be remembered. If they are remembered, they will wake. She closes the diary. And for the first time since opening it, the silence of the library feels occupied. The diary grows quieter after this. Not shorter, quieter. As if the knight understood that words themselves had become dangerous. He writes of clerics arriving at the camps days after the battle. Not negotiators. Not chaplains. Men without insignia, carrying sealed letters and speaking only at night. The questions stop. The markings end. Prisoners are no longer selected. Something has been agreed upon. History supports their arrival. Papal envoys are recorded in the region shortly after La Forbie, tasked with a spiritual oversight. No transcripts survive. No outcomes are listed. The diary provides one. The church did not ask what we found, the knight writes. They asked how long it could sleep. From that moment, records disappear. Names are altered. Reports rewritten. La Forbie becomes a military failure, nothing more. The near destruction of the Templars is attributed to pride, not knowledge. Containment requires silence. The knight is released weeks later. No ransom. No explanation. He returns west with others like him, men who eat, speak, pray, but no longer dream. Then the entries fracture completely. The handwriting shifts mid-sentence. Margins fill with the symbol, pressed so hard the parchment thins. He writes of waking at night knowing something is counting him, not watching, but measuring. I was spared, he confesses. So the memory would survive outside the field. The historian feels a dull ache at the base of her skull. She realizes she has been holding her breath. Around her, the library clock has stopped, not broken, simply paused between seconds. She recalls a fact she has taught for years. In 1307, the church moves against the Templars with ruthless precision. Arrests coordinated across Europe. Charges rehearsed. Confessions extracted. It was never sudden. It was delayed. The diary's final entry in this section is dated decades after La Forbie. The ink is steady. The tone resigned. They feared us while we remembered. They destroyed us when we began to forget. As she turns the page, the historian notices something impossible. The symbol is no longer drawn. It is embossed. From the other side. The arrests of 1307 were not justice. They were maintenance. The diary does not rage against the church. It does not accuse. It explains. By the time King Philip moved against the Templars, the order was already hallowed. Its rituals preserved. Its discipline intact. But its purpose altered. Those who remembered La Forbie were old men by then. Many had already been silenced. Others had learned the most important lesson of survival: forget selectively. The knight writes that Rome did not fear the Templars' power. They feared their memory. Confessions extracted under torture mention idols, demons, forbidden knowledge. History dismisses them as fabrications, and rightly so. But the diary suggests something subtler. The Watchers were never worshipped. They were contained. And containment requires caretakers. The Grand Master's disappearance was not an execution. It was a transfer. The diary claims a lineage was established, not of blood, but of obligation. Men who would never speak of La Forbie, yet would ensure the site remained sealed. When the order could no longer be trusted to forget, it was destroyed. Efficiently. Publicly. Permanently. The historian closes the book and understands why the diary survived when so much else was burned. It was not hidden to protect the truth. It was hidden to preserve the warning. Outside the library, bells begin to ring, not in alarm, but in sequence. The same sequence the knight once described as a measuring sound. She checks the final page. It is not dated. It is addressed. To the one who reads this, it says, "You are not chosen. You are noticed." The symbol beneath the text is incomplete, as if waiting for the last line to be added. History teaches that the Templars are gone. The diary disagrees. It insists they were replaced. And as the historian feels the stone beneath the library floor vibrate, faint, Patient, she realizes the final truth of La Forbie. The Watchers were never defeated. They were delayed. History tells us the Templars were destroyed because they were too powerful, too rich, too proud. But La Forbie tells a different story. It was not the day they lost a battle. It was the day they were chosen. Chosen to remember what others could not. Chosen to guard what should never be named. And finally, were chosen to disappear. When memory became dangerous, the order was erased. Not to hide the truth, but to delay it. Because some things are not meant to be conquered, only contained. And if this story feels unfinished, that is not a failure of history. It is the warning.